Don't worry about it. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right, we'll try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, you sound so good. You sound so good, alive and well. My name is Elise Michaux. I do lots of things, but today I am the speaker, right? I consider myself and call myself the encourager. So my background is English literature. My mom was a high school English teacher, so I love the play on words and alliteration, if you will. So Elise, the encourager, that's how we arrived there, right? And my father was also a pastor, is a pastor, right? So encouraging and people, I was born to do it, right? And you might notice some folks who look like me and down here in the corner that I'm from. Before we get too far into this, I want to say thank you to the Black Student Union for sponsoring this event, having me here today. So also full time, I work currently as the marketing and communications director at Erie County Community College. So it's fun to be here in another community college where I am from. I'm originally from Connellsville. So I feel very honored to be here with you all this afternoon. So where do I fit in DEI? A very sensitive but important topic, right? We have media who has blown this into lots of different things. But as folks who are sitting in an educational institution, it's important that we arrive at the definition ourselves. We aren't necessarily told what it is, but we have these influential and intellectual discussions where we arrive at what the definition is for us, for ourselves, for grammar for a second, I, right? So can you turn to somebody, again, this is my, you can turn to me, right? And say, where do I fit in DEI? Find somebody, say, where do I fit in DEI? Absolutely. It's something that, although it has become this bigger thing, right? We all fit in it in some way, shape, or form. So I've already given away some of my clues and where I fit, right? But some of them you may not necessarily see. You might guess, right? But what else have I said so far, right? I work at a community college. That's part of my identifier. I'm a 35-year-old Black queer woman from Connellsville who grew up in a Christian household, right? Those are all pieces that helped me to arrive here at this stage. What I was just talking about is that I also went to Slippery Rock University. It's a huge part of my identity. If you give me 2 seconds, I'm gonna talk about the rock, right? And so as we go throughout this presentation, and you might even be asked this question, is where do you fit in? What are your pieces that make you and comprise your diversity, equity, and inclusion? And we'll get into that. But for right now, we're leveling the playing field. How do you define DEI? When you think of it, what's your definition? Can I get some folks to share with me? Yeah. Color. Absolutely. What else?
So I'm on the fundraising team here, so I'm going to go from that angle, but
Love it.
Initiatives that make sure that everybody has equitable access to everything happening on campus, and not just campus hurdles that are removed, but exterior hurdles that are removed as well. So to make sure that we've got those open pathways to everything happening.
I love it. Did everybody hear that? The open pathways so that no matter what, anybody can achieve the goals that they're trying to reach. I feel like I did that justice. Anybody else? These are great. I saw you kind of about to raise your hand. You want to go for it? Status. Ooh, tell me more about that, if you will. Socioeconomic status. Absolutely. Absolutely. All of those things comprised, right, put us in boxes. But we also don't have to let those things define us, right? It's a part of you and a part of who you are, the I in DEI, if you will, for the sake of today's topic. But your socioeconomic status does not determine where it is that you can and will go. Because there's folks like Megan who are ensuring that no matter what, you get to where you're trying to go, right? That's the beauty of it. So when we look at the fancy and we really determine what that definition is, right? This is based off of, I think, Merriam-Webster, I think I pulled these from. So the literal term, diversity is encompassing a wide range of characteristics included but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability status, socioeconomic status, religion, and cultural background. Right? So no matter what it is on those things of where I might fall, that helps me with diversity, right? Socioeconomic status, I think, is a big one. And when we think about, especially, I think it was very much highlighted during the pandemic, right? That folks, based on their socioeconomic status, did not have access to particular things. So another thing about me is I'm a first generation doctoral candidate now at this point, hoping to defend in a couple weeks. Thank you. Tired. I'm tired. I'm ready to get off the stage. In that research that I'm doing and have done is talk to CDOs, Chief Diversity Officers, who are at predominantly white institutions, and for short, PWIs. And what I found in talking to them, one of the stories that has stuck with me, and I literally talked to him around probably this time almost 2 years ago now. He said, I had to tell my peers, very smart people, the top dogs of the institution, that some of the reason that our students aren't turning on their cameras is because they probably are sharing their Wi-Fi with auntie, grandma, everybody's under the same roof. They might not be able to share, the Wi-Fi might not be strong enough to share the video because they might be ashamed of what is behind them, right? So it's bringing the attention and helping people understand that even though our lens can sometimes be this big, it's so much bigger. And because each of us has different experiences based on all these things of where we diversify ourselves, if we didn't have these conversations, our world would be so limited. Think about it. It's so simplistic. If each of us had the same experiences, there would be no reason for you to even be here today listening to me, right? What makes the beauty of this world is that each of us have walked a different path. But similarly, that beauty is somehow, sometimes we all come together in one space. All of us, for some reason, we're all here at Westmoreland County Community College this afternoon, right? And so it's up to us to engage one another in these regards so that we might impact the world one day at a time, one conversation at a time. I'm that crazy person who believes that we literally can change the world. It's through the conversations. It's through these presentations where we're sharing knowledge with one another. One of the reasons that I got into student affairs and wanting to do higher education is because my students teach me something every single day. And if I thought, oh, I'm just this high and mighty person, right, with these degrees, and didn't level myself and humble myself to be taught from my students, I would have missed out on so much. Who are we missing out from and having a conversation with that maybe they're in? I saw you got a Starbucks on campus. That's dope. That would be very problematic for my bank account. And thankfully that didn't come around at Slippery Rocks campus till I was old fart and gone, because that Quaker Steak and Lube up there now, my flex dollars would have been gone. I would have had way more than the freshman 30. You understand what I'm saying? It would have been. Anyway, when we have the opportunity to engage with others who may not worship like we do, who may not love the person that we might not, come on. You're missing out on educating yourself and opening your eyes. That might not be the walk that you walk. And heck, maybe even after the conversation, you still might not agree. But at least you had it, right? And what's the harm in doing that? I love that our governor often, I know it's his social media team, but it's part of his mantra is, no matter who you love, no matter where you worship, no matter, you belong here. And so when we really look at, I like that they've begun to add a B to this, that sense of belongingness. No matter who you are and where you fall within that diversity, you belong here, right? So we got diversity down. Next is equity. Ensuring fair treatment, opportunities, advancement, while striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Different from equality, which often gets confused because they sound so similar. Equality implies treating everyone the same. Equity recognizes that different people have different needs and circumstances. I don't know about you, but when I walk into Mickey D's, I want a Sprite and some fries, right? That's my personal go-to. And most of the time, some chicken nuggets too, right? And I want to be served that without question, if you will, right? The expectations that it's hot and maybe there's a smile in it, right? But that's the equity part, if you will, is that no matter who it is that comes into McDonald's, if you ask these questions and pay this money, you're going to get said thing. Fair enough, right? And so when we're asking for these larger things, I ain't gonna get into it too much, but when we're thinking about voting here in a couple weeks, right? People had to fight for me, this person in this body, to do that thing. That was someone fighting for equity. Someone had to fight for me to get on a bus and not have to be relegated to the back. You get where I'm going. And so that's the equity piece. And so when we're fighting for these larger initiatives, that's what equity boils down to. No matter who you are and what you're about, you deserve to be treated fairly. What's the golden rule? treat others the way you would want to be treated. And it feels as though we've gotten so far away from that that we're missing out on the human element. And so it behooves each and every one of us to find out how we might help to move that needle in a positive direction. I think about, and I think even I meant equity there. Equality, I meant equality there. Equity is this part where I want to highlight the fact that at EC3, for short, Erie County Community College, one of the things that I love that we're doing is working to remove barriers, right? So we talked about that a second here. Right now, we're able to offer free tuition to the students who want to come and join and be a part of the college, right? Which is just amazing. But one of our mantras as being part of it is to ensure that we're not creating barriers as we're building the system, right? I bet the educators, the professionals in the space would love to be able to start from the beginning. It's been the greatest blessing of my career, but the biggest challenge, right? Because you have to be so intentional about ensuring that you aren't unintentionally creating these barriers, right? So when you talk about, again, the equity and the equality, it's ensuring that no matter somebody's, for example, Erie County residents are able to ride the bus for free. EC3 students are able to ride the bus for free. So no matter anybody's socioeconomic status, we don't know folks' stories, right? They're able to access that just based on being a part of what we're doing at the college, right? So think about it as it pertains to these programs and things that you're studying as students. Think about it as being the professionals in the space. How are you ensuring that you're leveling the playing field, right? That fair treatment and providing opportunities. And then you're treating everyone the same way, no matter what. That's the equality piece. You can't have one. That's why they get so confused, right? You can't really have one without the other. You should. But it's up to us to constantly examine. I'll give you another example. Watch my time here. We are recently doing some interviews, and it's for a admissions counselor on campus. And we were bringing them back 1, 2, 3 times, right? Is that equitable? The question, because I'm constantly doing this work, I'm thinking that's someone who's probably working an hourly job, who might not have the PTO, might not have the sick time to keep coming back to land the next gig. And then what if you don't even get it, right? These are the things and the lenses in which we can really benefit ourselves by pulling them through. And lastly, but not important, and most importantly, is inclusion. It's the practice of creating environments in which any individual or group can feel welcomed, respected, and valued. Regardless of their background, characteristics, everyone has access to opportunities and resources. I think we all want that and understand why we're striving towards that inclusion, that belongingness. Everybody should feel welcome, no matter what. So I love this visual, and I hope the folks in the back are able to appreciate this. This was one of my favorite books growing up, and they've broken down the terms that we just kind of discussed in this way. So inequality, right? Unequal access to opportunities. right? This one's just fallen, and it's plentiful over here, and then not too much at all. Just, come on, where's my apple, right? And then there's equity, custom tools that identify and address inequality. So look, now we've got a ladder, but it's not just a ladder. It's adjusted so that they can get up there and get one too. Then you have equality. Evenly distributed tools and assistance, right? So if that ladder wasn't the same, that's what we're looking at. And lastly, it's justice, fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So again, giving you some of the history, a lot of people had to fight to bring the community college to Erie County. You have up there Penn State Barron, Gannon University, Mercyhurst University, very different price tags, number one, and philosophies than the community college. And what I've learned in my time is that we as an Erie County had been paying and putting into the pocket of even this community college. So Erie County wasn't getting their share of the pie. And lots of people fought to bring that ladder to Erie County, if you will, for the sake of this story, so that everybody had access to education. And it's been an honor and privilege to be a part of bringing that. So I'm not just speaking to you today from as a person who enjoys talking about this stuff. Literally, I get to do this every single day. And I'm very proud to share that we are over 720 students in just 3 years. Pretty phenomenal. And what's powerful is I'm so jealous of each and every one of them, and you all too. The intergenerational conversations that can happen at a community college based on, and I think about my own, where it was a lot of folks who 18, 19, 20 in the classroom. It was great. Don't get me wrong, but don't take for granted the folks who have lived a little bit more than you have that might be in your classroom. That is special. That is special because you can learn so much. Again, it's that DEIB, right? That intergenerational dialogue that can happen is truly something special. So when I was at Seton Hill University prior to my time at the community college, prior to joining to the community college, I was working at Seton Hill as the director of student leadership and involvement. And there I got introduced to this video. And because we were doing work around DEIB there, one of the things that we did was have these focus groups, and you'd get paired up with someone. They would share a part of their story, and you would share part of yours. And it was the other person's job to pay attention to that so that when we got back to the larger group, you put yourself in their shoes and told their story. Powerful experience. We can never necessarily walk somebody else's walk, but having that really, I don't want to say it changed my life, but just doing that simple but profound exercise really changed my perspective. And this TED Talk talks about the danger of a single story. It's about 18 minutes long, but I'm only going to show you the first portion of it. I'd love to hear your reactions after watching. A few moments. What do I have to do to get it to play? I was going to say, is that a you? Thank you. Thank you for the assist.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Lai, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what's important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were facing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power.
Your thoughts?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah.
Something similar.
Can you say that a little bit louder for me, that last part? She viewed people how people used to view her. Yeah. Absolutely. Any other reactions?
I thought it was really important when she talked about, you know, the houseboy who came to work for her family. It wasn't that she looked down at him or disliked him or was, but she just didn't even realize the depth there. So the fact that she acknowledged that it was, you know, it's something that probably transcends to a lot of different areas where people don't think they're being negative or don't think that they're making people, looking at people in a one-dimensional way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Librarian here, and I really identified with what she was saying in the beginning about the books. And I feel very strongly, as many librarians do, that there needs to be representation for everyone in books. And there's a wonderful site called We Need Diverse Books, which advocates this. And in our children's collection and also in our regular collection, we very strong. And I believe that that's a very important part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Make sure that everyone's story is represented.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that work. Seen and unseen work, right? That's very
Again, the story, I know I want you to add before I go on a tangent here.
I mean, the thing I was thinking of was like the inescapability of ignorance, right? So it's like you don't know about the other person. All you have to go on is whatever stories you've got, which is one story and it's not good, right? And so like everybody's sort of susceptible to it.
Right.
And it's always sort of creates these sort of problems because we're making our judgments, we're acting based on that ignorance.
Yeah. Well said. We are human. We are human. And we're constantly learning. Hopefully today you're learning something in this time together, but we have to give one another grace and space to arrive at a little less ignorance. And we have to be open to that little less ignorance, right? There's so many, I would encourage you to, even after this, go and watch the rest of it. It is very, very, very good. I'm like y'all, I appreciate that she owns that even herself, right? When talking about the immigrants, she had seen it over and over and over again and thought, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. So it behooves us because our brains, right? We like categories. We like putting things in. I know you really love it, right? You're a librarian. That's you. That's your jam. My brain works the same way, right? Yours does too. We like to put things in categories. However, it's up to us to check those things called biases. I was telling the class that I did this presentation with last week, I love The Voice. You know where this is going. I love that show. Why? Because their backs are to the singers. They can't let this be what challenges them to make the decision. It has to be here. What do they hear? Do they hear the radio? Do they hear the talent? Do they hear the Grammy? Right? What can be developed? What is the potential? So again, I would challenge each and every one of you as you move throughout even just the rest of the day to check your biases and just watch. You'll get tired after an hour. Just why do we love people watching? Because we're making assumptions about who those people are. I was downtown in the strip district yesterday. I was like, ooh, everybody had their Steelers gear on. So I'm like, ooh, there's somebody's uncle, loves the Steelers. He's been watching the Steelers since 55, and he's got his dad Nikes on. We all do it. It's when we allow them to influence how we treat someone, how we talk to someone, that makes it a little bit different, right? And so in a world that asks you to scroll and consume and judge and like and not like every single day, how can you disrupt what we're so trained to do? It's hard. You have to be very intentional. But I would argue you're very smart and could take this challenge that I'm giving you today to disrupt that. Now, I know the judges are different, but Snoop Dogg's on there, Reba McEntire's on there now. Who else? Turn on those blinders. Turn your back. How can you check what it is that automatically happens in your brain? Maybe sometimes you're right. Maybe sometimes, maybe most of the time, you're wrong. I'll never forget, in college, I took people who were quiet as being just shy. Some folks are not this, right? Some folks are just reserved. And once you get talking to them, most of them, you can't get them to stop talking, right? We've all been in the other seat, whether that was for your race, for your gender, insert minority status here, right? No matter what it is. So if you know how that feels, how do you disrupt that? Again, it's just being aware and being open to checking that. I don't know if that took me off of the clicker status.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the assist. I appreciate that. How does DEI affect you as we begin to close out? How does DEI affect you? I think arguably we've talked about that the last few minutes. But it impacts us sometimes even on a global standpoint, on a very personal standpoint, we'll say a macro level, a micro level. Your identity, even as being a community college student, that is unique and powerful, right?
Sorry, I can't wait. What's DEI?
DEI, can someone define that for us? Go ahead. That's you.
Diversity, equity.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've been talking about how our differences make us great. Period. No matter where you're from, no matter how you were raised, no matter who you love, no matter what. So that's diversity. So then the equity part is ensuring that no matter what, you can have access and opportunities. And in the I is the inclusion, ensuring that folks are involved and can get over barriers, and we are intentionally or unintentionally setting. Does that feel fair? Like a fair recap? So now you're caught up. No, don't apologize. I'm glad you're here. So, I guess the important piece for me that you leave here with today is that this thing that constantly gets blown, in my opinion, blown out of proportion, affects each and every one of us every single day. And understanding how impactful this work is and how it affects you is how we can make the change. That's how we make the difference. Right? Right now, this presentation, we have people who can enjoy it in person and online. For someone who may not be able to leave their desk or just couldn't be here, that is the equity part. Ensuring that no matter what, right? So, you can make a difference in this work every single day. You just have to look at it in a way and want to, right? To make that impact, to make that difference. I would love some reactions. Based on that, how do you think DEI affects you? What's that? How we dress. Ooh, can you tell me more? I like that. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. My wife, if we're going somewhere, she'll always say, how am I supposed to dress? I don't know. Wear your best dress, right? But I'll give you the counter. I showed up in this to do a presentation a couple weeks ago. And everybody was in business casual. And I was like, no one told me, right? That was my immediate. Then I was like, I guess I'm kind of in charge. So, but that, when we go to weddings, I mean, think about it. If I go to weddings now, you're gonna see someone in jeans. COVID changed everything. But I like it. It's leveled the playing. That's somebody's best dressed. And that's okay. They're there to celebrate. If they can dance, that's really all that's the qualifier, right? And you're gonna eat good too. So more room. Shouldn't. You get my point, right?
Respect culture, talk about that. Yeah, I thought about it in terms of the Bible a lot.
Yeah.
And DEI was prominent in the book of Exodus, where Joseph, being a Hebrew, was not an Egyptian, it's not their culture, but he had the eyes of a Egyptian. Fast forward to the book of Daniel, King Xerxes had Daniel and 3 other Hebrews a part of his administration. And then, as I begin to look at that, I fast forward to the book of Revelation, the 7th chapter, where it talks about John said he saw all of these people, all of these ethnic groups, born up to the throne room, of all nationalities, of all languages, of all cultures. Got it.
Absolutely. I love that. So for some of you who may have missed that or walked in, these are my folks down here. My dad is a pastor, so that is the lens in which he's always going to view things. So I appreciate that. And so, oh yeah, please.
I was the
mean, again, I'm really trying not to be political, but it's so important that folks are at school nourished. I don't know about you, but in my vows, I had to say, I ain't gonna be hangry and be mean. Right? Because if I'm hungry, it's not. And I saw a meme that said you got about 30 minutes to fix it. If I say I'm hungry, I was really hungry about 45 minutes ago. So if I'm now announcing it, it's 29 and count. 29. You understand what I'm saying? And so for the student who might be in your classroom, who this is the only meal they're getting, and there's just one. Maybe there's 2 meals at school. How those initiatives are helping to level the playing field, right? And we can give so many examples of that work. But again, as a future educator, I hope, and I can already tell the lens in which you'll appreciate every student comes in your classroom, knowing who that student is, right? And what they might be bringing or not bringing to the desk. Okay. Can I give one more click? I think that just about takes us to the end. And this could just be a rhetorical question, but I'm open to responses, and you kind of already hit on it. Based on what we've talked about today, how will you make a difference? I believe that the greatest way, again, like I said, I think that I'm crazy enough to believe each and every one of us can change the world. I truly believe that. And I think deep down, each of you believe that, or you wouldn't be here participating in this presentation today. Our biases exist. They're not bad, but it is on us to check them. Running it through that filter to ensure that we're not missing out on something, or it's the danger of that single story that has informed that bias or those biases. And so I will say again, the best story I know is my own. Being in Erie and being able to engage with, that's a very big new immigrant population. And so people who don't worship the same way that I do got to even participate in this documentary that went to the different neighborhoods and all of that. Again, I love food. So we got to try the different cuisine and the culture. And one of the best ways that we can learn from other folks is by eating food from that culture. And you can always sign me up for that, right? But again, this work is so important. And so I hope you saw you in this presentation today. And when you leave here, you might share it with someone else. This is how we move the needle. Everyone deserves a seat at the table. And when we make it to the seat and to the table, right, we're bringing the voices and the people with whom we've interacted with to provide voice to that. That's how we do it. That's how we change the world. And I think there's one. That's it. Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
And I have cookies and coffee outside the door.